Next up this afternoon is Hazel Barton. Hazel is currently a professor and the director of the Integrated Bioscience Program at the University of Akron. She is a recipient of a career award from the National Science Foundation, a Kavli Fellow of the National Academy of Sciences, a Fellow of the American Academy of Microbiology, and recipient of the Alice C. Evans Award for the Advancement of Women in Microbiology. She also likes caves. Good afternoon, Hazel. Go ahead and take over.
Thanks, Jana, for the very nice introduction that I wrote. So I'm going to talk about the work that I've been doing, mapping a couple of the mazes in Lechuguilla Cave. So probably everybody's seen the map multiple times today and they realize how complex a cave this is. I have worked on two of the more complicated areas of that, the voids and the Chandelier Graveyards maps. And I wish I had like a nice breakout story like everybody else has, but this is gonna be more of an incremental foot by foot kind of slogging away, mapping the cave. We've discovered over 4 miles of cave, but unfortunately no significant breakouts despite vast amounts of effort. Anyway, I want to thank the photographers. I'm going to be using photographs from Dave Bonnell, James Hunter, Jean Creature, Pat Sizer, Steve Smith, Rainer Straub, Tim Williams, and Max Wissack. And I wish I could have put everybody's name on every photo, but I have 59 slides and they've got lots of photos on them. So everybody should probably brace themselves because we're going to go fast. All right, if I can figure out how to, there we go. All right, so this is a map. This is a 3D map of Lechuguilla. You can see there's some really complicated areas within the cave. This is the far east. This is the far west. And there's a couple of big complex areas. One of them is called the Chandelier Graveyard, which is this area right here. And when I was in my 20s, I started making cave maps in Colorado, and I got a little bit cocky about it, and I thought it was pretty good. And Steve Reams says, why don't you go map this thing called the Chandelier Maze in Lechuguilla Cave? If you can draft a pretty good map, well, I'll take you in there on one of my expeditions and you can work on it. I thought, well, this is fantastic. You know, it's an opportunity to go into Lechuguilla Cave, and it looked pretty complicated. And I like taking on challenges. So I thought this would be a good thing to do. At the time, I thought it might take 2 or 3 years worth of work. And it's 25 years later, and I'm still working on it right now. I had to put this in here. I actually went through my caving diary, and this is my first trip into Lechuguilla in 1998. And I really have it in there for no other reason than I was really thin. It's an awesome photo. Anyway, this is, if you've never, a lot of this talking is going to be out for people who've never been to Lech, but it's a hot cave. And when they tell you how hot the cave is, you have no idea how hot the cave is. So I'm a British caver. If you don't wear a lot of like thermals and coveralls in the UK when you go caving, you will die of hypothermia. So they told me it was a hot cave, and you can see I'm going in here with Pat and Evan, and they're both in t-shirts, and I've got this long sleeve shirt on, and it was a thermal long sleeve shirt on. Anyway, this is the after photo, and you can see that long sleeve shirt did not last long. I wore that thing. I insisted on wearing that thing because I just couldn't believe that a cave could be as warm as Lechuguilla was, but it was. And I think Andy alluded to it, with dehydration is a huge issue in there because you sweat so much. Anyway, it was a massive mistake because obviously I had no protection caving in a sports bra, but I did look pretty tough for the photo. When we went in there, we were going to this area in the Western Borehole called Manifest Destiny. It's an area that contains a famous formation called the Three Amigos, and this is caused by gypsum that's been carved by dripping water. And I drafted a pretty good map based on the notes I had available. And the notes that came from this area were from 1988. And you have to remember that the original surveyors were doing 24-hour day trips, oftentimes bivvying in the cave and using carbide light, often using carbide light where they were trying to squeeze every little bit of light out of it and time so they could do these big trips. So this sketch, at the time when I was drafting the map, I thought that doesn't look too bad. And I went in the cave and started walking around at the Three Amigos and realized it didn't look anything like it. So I had a draft map in my hand that basically didn't look anything like the cave. And we spent that first expedition remapping a lot of areas of that original map to make them look better so that I could actually draft it into a usable map that represented what the cave looked like. So this is just an example of the difference between the original sketch from 1998 and then my resketch. And I'm sorry, that's a typo. That should say 1998 there. So you can see a big difference. And I think a lot of that has to do with changes in expectations for the park, what their expectations are for quality of the sketch and quality of the data in the survey. And I was able to draft that into a map. So this is a map of that main level of the cave, and that area that you see in the map is actually drafted in here. So it did take, I don't know how many hundreds of hours we've spent in this part of the cave, but it's pretty good. I think this map's about 97% done. I usually indicate areas that still need a little bit of work, where the sketch doesn't look quite the same as the data, or you can see up here, there's some missing floor detail. So go back in on expeditions and you have a map in hand like this, and you can go to an area and know what it is that you have to fix. One of the things that we didn't do on that first trip, because I spent so much time in the Western Borehole, was go to the Chandelier Graveyard itself. To get up to the Chandelier Graveyard, it's actually a 50-foot ascent. So here's Vivian Lofton climbing up. It had this terrible old rope pad that was made out of a bit of carpet. That thing I bitched about for about 10 years until Stan finally said to me, why don't you just bring it out? So I carried it out, and it was completely full of gypsum, weighed about 2 pounds. I asked him what he wanted to do with it, and he said, throw it away. So it's now framed on my office wall. It's probably the most expensive rope pad ever, the amount it cost to frame the thing. But yes, my own little bit of Lechuguilla history hanging on my wall at work. It's amazing. I'm like a professor, and I have this fancy office, and there's this, very large piece of framed carpet on my wall. And usually the first thing people ask is that a carpet? Anyway, this is the drop out of the graveyard down into the main Western borehole here. You can see the 3 Amigos here. There's a really interesting story about how the graveyard was found by somebody getting lost. And I do encourage you to read Deep Secrets, because it has a lot of information about the history about how these areas were explored and discovered. The Chandelier Graveyard is named after the chandeliers that litter the floor in here. I heard someone say that they didn't think these chandeliers had fallen from the ceiling. There's a lot of areas where you can see breakage against the surface of the rock to indicate that these things have actually come down. Some of them have been covered in gypsum over time, so they've been buried and re-eroded by water, but they very clearly at one point were probably hanging to the ceiling, and they are everywhere. I mean, you're climbing over these things because they litter the floor everywhere, and there's no way to get through. And the graveyard itself is actually very pretty. These are some of the areas, is Reiner and Pat, some of the really more spectacular areas of the graveyard. The reason it hadn't been mapped is because of its complexity. So this is a plan. I've taken the survey stations out of here. There's about 7 miles of cave represented with these line plots here. And it's very difficult if you try to map this. You can see you've got multiple layers over the top of each other. We call these Boneyard Mazes. It's based on basically the morphology of bone. So this is an electron microscope image of the inside of your bone. And the reason that, we have strong bones that aren't too heavy to stop us moving around is they're full of this sponge work in the middle. And that's why we call these mazes Boneyard Mazes. You can see it's very similar to the inside of this bone. You're in this passage and there are holes everywhere. And this has been the biggest challenge as far as making the map. Is, what do you define as cave, what do you define as wall, and what do you define as floor? And it's very hard to sketch in there. I spent a lot of time sketching at Wind Cave, and I thought that being a Wind Cave sketcher would mean I could sketch anywhere. And then I got to Lechuguilla, and I'm like, well, there's not a wall here. There's technically not a floor here. I'm not entirely sure where I'm supposed to start. But anyway, we figured it out. And there's been multiple expeditions. I think I've done 10 expeditions out to the graveyard now with multiple groups of people. And we've been able to slowly fill this in. I think we've done about 40% resurvey of this area. It's about 20,000 feet of passage that we've resurveyed. And what we do is we generate preliminary draft maps. Not only do these preliminary draft maps help people navigate their way around the cave, but they also allow us to actually have them in hand and mark them up where we see issues. So, you know, like I showed you on that quad I've already created, you can draw a circle and say, the cave just doesn't look right here. So you take the notes, you draft a map, you take the map in, you field check it, you resurvey if you need to, and you just keep reiterating this. And so if you look at photos from my expeditions, I just kind of grabbed a handful. Every expedition where someone has come on my expedition, you see pictures of people staring at maps, trying to figure out what the hell is going on in this area, trying to map it. But if you do that, you can actually see this is the line plot. And then this is the first main levels of the graveyard. So I'm just gonna kind of flip back there between those two. So you can see that over time, we're slowly building it up, and it's actually working into a pretty good map. I think the graveyard, so the main borehole is one main level. There's a lower level of cave below that borehole. The main graveyard level to here, we call the Lost World. This is kind of you walk up this ramp and there's a very obvious flat area here. There's a sublayer of maze under here, which is its own quad. There's another subset of maze, which is an incredibly complex boneyard over here, which is another quad. And then there are 3 levels above this one. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 levels to map this part of the cave. And I would very much love to have been able to create a single map that incorporates all of that. But as you saw from Max's presentation, it's simply not possible. There's far too much complexity going on in this area. Oh, I did put the figure in. This is my slices. There should be 8 of them there. I didn't put that in, but I did. So anyway, I actually went in and you can see some of them are very close together. There's a pretty big jump up to the main graveyard level, and then the slices above. Pushing the cave, it's a pretty mature cave. And what I mean by that is this is a cave that people started exploring in 1988. And there's been a lot of pushing in there. So all the really obvious stuff has been done. And certainly all the other exploration talks, Art and James and Max have been saying that, if you want to find something, you've really got to push hard. So whenever I take people in Lech for the first time, they have, visions in their mind of like skipping down borehole with a disto taking 100-foot shots. And then they get into the cave and then I shove them into holes like this, or they're doing stuff like this, or they're doing stuff like this. And these are where the breakthroughs are being made. So a lot of what we're finding these days is actually pushing the stuff that absolutely looks ridiculous. Like there's no way a cave would go that way. And it turns out that's where it does go. The other way that we've been finding new passages through climbs, I encourage everybody to find their own climbing monkey that they can send up different places in the cave. I have 2. I have James and Derek, and they are both extremely good climbers, and they both really enjoy putting themselves through some pretty horrific conditions. We've been talking a lot about the gorilla shit in this symposium, and this is these ferromanganese deposits, which is basically microbial poop. And when you climb on it, you have no choice but to get absolutely slimed with it. And it really is, it's pretty remarkable that people are willing to do that level of technical climbing under those kind of conditions. We do have an article that just came out on the PhD room. This is us getting ready to go in. As James mentioned, people don't want to carry climbing gear in. And it's not that we're not particularly nice people, it's that climbing gear is heavy and you are going to be in the cave for 8 days. So everything you need to take in the cave has to fit in a pack. And then a climber comes over and adds, 2 or 3 pounds of gear to that, which might not seem much, but every pound counts. I've seen people do remarkable things to avoid weight in their packs. And I'll talk a little bit more to that, but you can see Nick here with his fabulous hair, weighing his pack there. And it was his first trip, and I just didn't want to make sure he's overburdened. I like people with, if they're new to the cave, to maybe take nothing more than about 35 to 37 pounds. People who are very experienced, I've seen James carry a 55-pound pack in there. But these people really need to know what they're doing and need to know if they can accommodate that kind of weight. And a lot of rope goes in on these climbing expeditions. But anyway, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the PhD room climb. Derek, James, and I wrote it up for Descent, and it was in the NSS News this month. All the climbs and all the squeezes lead to us finding this pretty gnarly passage. And then in addition to pictures of people squeezing in, I've got loads of pictures of people surveying in these like pretty horrific conditions. But that's where we find the cave. You know, the big walking borehole resurvey is nice to do, but it's not new cave. This is a graph I put together of the data that we've generated. And this is basically, if I take the notes from each of the expeditions I've done and look at the percentage of the notes that are resurvey versus new cave, it almost always starts out all resurvey. And we're basically taking the notes, looking for the worst surveys, and then just mapping that. And that creates a skeleton that I can use to draft the first version of the map. We bring that in and it'll have some leads marked on it. Those we start to push. And as you can see, as time goes on, the amount of resurvey kind of equals out with the amount of new survey that we get. Someone suggested that this not very informative because the distances do change. So I will admit that, you know, we might get 2 miles of cave on a resurvey trip where we're doing 100% resurvey for 8 days in the cave. And these numbers out at 8 and 9 expeditions where we've been pushing hard, we might be looking at somewhere between 1 mile and 1.2 miles. So there is a reduction in overall material that we're generating. But we're finding some, you know, I think we're averaging, you know, half a mile of new cave on these trips. I wanted to talk a little bit about camping. All the exploration talk so far, I haven't really talked much about the logistics, and I'm not going to take away from Beth's more detailed information on this. It's a little bit my experience of camping. This is my camping pack, what I pack in there and then with it on my back. And I did this photo. I can't remember what I did this for, but I must admit, as I've become a lot more experienced in Lechuguilla, I've gotten a lot more, let's say, desirous of having luxuries in camp. So one of the things, which is right there, that is a chair. So I actually carry a chair with me. And I got that idea from James. If you're sketching for 8 hours a day, your back is absolutely killing you when you get back to camp. And so having a chair that you can sit in is fantastic. So James bought the first chair in, I don't even remember which expedition I saw it, maybe 2011, 2012. And then the next expedition, there were 2 chairs. And I think the last expedition we went in, which was Derek's expedition in the graveyard, there were like 5 chairs at camp. And people that poo-pooed the idea of chairs, you would often come back to camp and see them in there. I also have some camp socks, some little slippers that I can wear to walk around camp, and fairy lights. In Max's presentation, you saw that he marked out the 150. So there's certainly, the more experience you get, the more you know what to expect in the cave and the more weight you can carry. Of course, you do have to carry that through the cave. So these are big packs, plus you've got climbing gear. And then when you get to leave the cave, you've eaten all the food, but the food is being converted to solid waste. So you would think that after 8 days, it wouldn't weigh as much, but it's still pretty heavy. And as the cartographer, I often have all the survey notes in my bag as well. So it's usually just as heavy on the way out as it is on the way in, except you've got to go uphill. I've been accused, I think, today of having unusual camp habits. I don't know where that came from. I will say that I have done a lot of camps in Lech, and I seem to spend my entire camping experience around men walking around in their underpants. So I don't think I necessarily have all the issues here. To compensate for this, I have actually led some all women's trips. And you can see that in the case of the all women's trips, we are clothed. So it's appropriate attire there. But anyway, it's really interesting. It's a remarkably different dynamic in the cave when you have a bunch of women. We had morning yoga sessions. We had entertainment in the evening. We had people singing. We had a disco with distos. It's a lot of fun having an all women's trip. The other maze that I'm working on is the voids. And this is this area of the cave over here. So it's actually more complex and denser in the graveyard. It's also one of the deepest points in the cave. It goes down to Sulphur Shores, and I think it's about 1,586 feet, maybe 1,568. But anyway, it's pretty deep. It's not quite Lake of the White Roses, which is over here, but it used to be the deep point of the cave. Getting to the voids is actually pretty pleasant. I spent 10 years mapping the graveyard before I saw any other part of the cave. So I had this kind of the Western trip kind of nailed in and dialed in. And I'd never been to any other part of the cave. So I was really excited when Stan and Dell encouraged me to take on the Graveyard Maze as another mapping project. Getting there, you get to see some of the more famous sites. So this is the large borehole. You get to walk through the Chandelier Graveyard, which is obviously a treat. And then you get onto my quad. This is Land of the Lost. The reason it's called Land of the Lost, you can't really see it from this photograph because it was taken primarily to capture the pretties, but there are 27 different surveys coming off of this room. It does have a double flagged trail through it, but without that double flag trail, I can imagine the first time you walked into this and turned around and tried to figure out how to walk back out, you would have been in trouble. This is camp. This is the Big Sky camp. I agree with Max that Deep Seas is the nicest camp in the cave, but as far as cave camping goes, Big Sky is pretty luxurious. You can see we get to spread out here. And it's a very beautiful area. The voids, most of what we're doing looks a lot like the photographs that I showed you in the graveyard, where it's like wiggling around in the dirt, pushing small tubes, but there really are some spectacular areas. This is Persian Gulf. This is High Hopes. This is some helictites up in High Hopes. Oh, sorry, that's not High Hopes, that's Yo Acres. I do apologize. Some gypsum hair. This is all over the place in there. It's really quite remarkable that gypsum can do that. And then more famously, Lake Castrovalva. So the original explorers swam across this lake, but as Max discussed, and Ron as well, Art as well, crossing the lakes is kind of verboten. So we actually have, as a cave microbiologist, I can actually have access to a lot of ways of sterilizing things. So we sterilized this boat. We actually took a boat across the lake as opposed to swimming. And this is the far side. So truly a spectacular area. And I agree with Dave Bonnell that this is one of the pretty, well, it is the prettiest part of any cave that I've been in, and I've been in quite a few caves. So this is what the voids plan map looks like. So in this case, I've actually left on the survey station designations. And I got to tell you, there are some of the worst survey designations in the history of cave surveys. There's one called FNSSSS 27-4, and then it goes A through J. And that's because people aren't historically, they were not taking used survey designations and guessing at what they could use. So we end up with these ridiculous survey designations. Anyway, I'm just going to show you how I work on the map. So I'm just going to highlight this area here. So what I'm going to do is show you how I build this really complicated maze into a map. So I try to figure out where to slice the cave based on elevation. And the cave isn't really based in flat slices. It's more like an onion peel, or edges of an onion. So the different layers of an onion. I think John alluded to that. So you're trying to figure out, you guess what your best level is. Then you draft that with the notes that you have available to you. You take that draft map into the cave. You mark it up in the cave with things that need to be done for the next expedition. You go back in the next expedition, you do those chores that you set yourself, and then mark more areas. So I could see there was some complexity here that needed to be resolved, and some other question marks. Go back in, reiterate. In this case, I actually pulled a level up from below and added it to this map and did an offset. Offsets moved. This is an area I pulled down from the level above. This one was pulled up from the level below. So what happens is I start with what I think is a level, and then as the map continues to grow, I pull in different mapped areas and pull them together. So this is what that final map looks like. I don't have the shading of the upper and lower levels on it yet because this one's still pretty new. This one's a little bit more advanced. You can see this is Yo Acres and Big Sky Camp right here. And you can see the differing levels of the graveyard as it works its way down. And here's another level here that's still working. I believe it's going to take 8 levels also to finish the voids. And just similar to the graveyard, I looked at resurvey versus the new survey that was done. And you can see that when we begin, there's lots of resurvey, and then there's kind of evens out. And again, much more survey in the original expeditions. So this is actually a photo of me leading my first expedition in 2003, and a gratuitous use of me as a young person photo as well. Since then, I've been on 21 expeditions in Lechuguilla and led or co-led 18 of those. My expeditions have resulted in 47,000 feet of resurvey and 21,000 feet of new survey. And the most important thing is that we've been able to generate maps of these areas that previously had not been mapped. Being the expedition leader is a huge amount of work. Oh, you can see my fairy lights in the background. Look at that. This is a picture Robbie took of me at camp at night. So you have to make sure everybody's got their notes together, that everything's complete, that people make daily logs. You have to compile everything, make sure you got your inventory notes. So while the rest of the team are kind of settling down for the night, a lot of times you're spending an hour, maybe an hour and a half sitting there at camp, making sure everything's up to date, and also planning for the next day because you're responsible for sending teams out. When you're done with the expedition, you have to write reports up. So in addition to writing an expedition permit, which can be 6 or 7 pages long, you also have to write a report on what you did in the cave. Obviously, the park is not going to give you a permit to go in the cave if you can't demonstrate that you are productive with your time when you're in there. And at the same time, you also end up with a bunch of survey notes that you have to compile, sort, and get into the map. This is a task that is dramatically simplified since Ron Miller has started digitizing all the notes and making them available to the cartographers. So instead of having to have a box full of papers under my desk now that I have to scan myself, I can just pull PDFs straight out of the cloud. And then there has to be a certain type of person that understands that you're going to go in the cave and just map something that is either going to be small, measurable, and tight, or has been mapped before. We have had some breakouts. We've had some nice discoveries, and we've had a really good time. But I've been very fortunate to have a group of people that are willing to come in there with me and understand the goals of what we're trying to do, and do the work necessary to make this happen. You can't generate this kind of map, this kind of complexity, without people who are dedicated to the cause. So I want to thank my core team, the people that come in with me on a regular basis. I do try to take 1 or 2 new people every trip, but I do have to have a core of experienced people who can handle the packs, the heat, and also really have kind of bought into the idea of what we're trying to do is create a map. Max Wissack has been a long-term collaborator of mine. I think I've been on all his expeditions, and he's been on all but one of my expeditions. We've often co-led expeditions together. He's a riot, he's hilarious, and he is a very gifted cartographer. The other members of my core team are Andy Armstrong, Derek Bristol, Beth Courtwright, Peter Haviland, James Hunter, Aria Mildice, Pat Sizer, Raina Straub, and Tim Williams. And that is me. Thank you.